Hi, my name is Heather Backus.
And I'm Randy Backus. And we're the parents of a forever 21-year-old son who died by suicide in cannabis induced psychosis.
Randy started using marijuana at the age of 15, and he did it for social acceptance, probably trying to feel comfortable in his own skin. He really believed that it was medicinal and that it was good for him, that it enhanced all his creativity. He really bought into all the industry propaganda and quickly developed a cannabis use disorder. I think he was diagnosed with a cannabis use disorder by the time he was 16.
And we never condoned his use. We didn't allow it in our house. So we had pretty strict rules. We held our boundaries. But what we didn't understand was all the damages that could come from today's marijuana. So the stuff we thought what it was stuff when we grew up, which it was, I don't want to say it was harmless, but it was not as potent as it is today.
So it brought a lot of chaos into our home because we disagreed. Randy thought it was perfectly fine and safe. We were worried about addiction. We were worried about probably his motivation that it would make him lazy and that he wouldn't be successful in life. But as Randy said, we really didn't know what today's high potency products were doing to his brain. So we eventually sent him to wilderness therapy because Randy was struggling and it was bringing a lot of chaos. And then he came home and he was pretty angry and upset about being at wilderness therapy, and he still wanted to use marijuana. So when people say it's not addictive, it really is addictive. Um, he would take periods where he wasn't using and then he would start using again. And eventually he did graduate school online and he decided that he really wanted to attend the University of Colorado Boulder. Um, and we decided that it'd probably be best if he took a gap year.
So he took a gap year to be able to get his residency because at that point we just said we're not going to pay for your college. And being out of state from Minnesota to Colorado, it was very expensive to send him to Boulder. And we said if you get your residency, go to community college, maybe take some of those steps, show us that you're ready, then we might be able to help you or partner with you through college. Unfortunately, he got his medical marijuana card when he was 19. So his first year he was out there, he got his medical marijuana card. And we didn't know any of this until after he had passed. But the reason why this is important is, he would have different times where when we would talk with him, like we said, everything kind of sounded like he was doing well. And it wasn't until about the last 8 months of his life. So in December of 2020, he decided that he was going to be a famous rap artist. He told us in January. And both Heather and I were kind of dumbfounded and befuddled because he was not musically inclined. He had taken maybe two guitar lessons in his life, and here he's going to be a rapper. And that's when when really the wheels kind of started to kind of come off of his train, and everything really changed.
And ironically, kind of looking back, we did notice a personality change in him probably around May of 2020, June. Uh, he seemed okay, but then he would talk about things that, again, in hindsight, we now know he was showing evidence of paranoia and psychosis. But at the time, we just didn't have a clue that that's what was going on with his brain. He was struggling with his roommates. He thought that they were after him, out to get him. And then now looking forward, we now know he was having some psychotic episodes. So once January came and he thought he was going to become this famous rap artist, we started having a lot of issues with him. He was very angry. He was becoming more and more irrational. And then in March of 2021, he had a full blown psychotic episode and he called us and he thought that the mob was after him, that there were gangs that were after him. And he was really panicked and just totally not himself. And at that point, he asked, when he kind of got more towards his right mind, he asked us for help. So we made arrangements for Randy to go to treatment at a treatment center in Florida. And sadly, he was put into detox for 4 days because of COVID. And he wasn't given any medications, which again, we didn't know he needed medications. And after transitioning to the treatment center, he lasted 1 hour in treatment and then he had his own plan to get sober, which unfortunately included, working in a marijuana dispensary. He was completely not thinking correctly.
So just to kind of backtrack on that. So when he had his psychotic break, I went out to Colorado. I drove out there. I packed up his whole apartment. He and I, well, pretty much he laid around while I did it. He texted all his friends that he was going to treatment. I flew with him down to the treatment center in Florida. And, hindsight's always easier to look back and kind of say, I should have done this and I should have done that. But being that the treatment center picked him up, we thought, okay, he's going to be okay down there and he's going to go through treatment. So I hopped on the next flight back to Colorado, drove the car that I packed up back to Minnesota, assuming that he'd be coming back to Minnesota, whether it be in 60 days, 90 days, or 120 days. So when he left the treatment center, it created a lot of chaos because he just said he didn't need the help. And we knew that he did need the help, but we didn't understand how this stuff had really kind of grabbed his thought process, his brain, how everything was just so messed up. We just thought that honestly, we thought he had a lot of mental illness. And the fact of the matter was, the marijuana had really changed who he was. It changed what he thought. It it's frightening now looking back because we have a lot more answers than we did then. But as Heather said, fast forward, he goes back to Colorado, moves back into his apartment. So I never checked him out of his apartment. I just moved all of his stuff here. We shipped it all back to him, and he then proceeded to kind of get back into his music and start making music again. But what was great from our standpoint, as we found out after he passed, is he started recording snippets of himself either while he was using or while he was going through tolerance breaks and talking about how he was, marijuana, you know, he had a psychotic break. He talked about that, all these things that he ended up recording that we found after he passed away.
Yeah. And so if we go into April, Randy, was trying in the beginning of April, he was trying not to use. And he talks about his psychotic experience in those videos and shares a little bit about that. And then in this period of trying not to use, he became suicidal and he actually called himself into the Denver police and reported himself. And at that point, he had purchased a legally registered gun and called the police, and it was in his right hand pants pocket. They took it out, they put it in his personal safe, and brought him to the hospital. And he was put on a 3-day hold. The doctor called us, and we were very grateful and thankful, thinking now Randy's going to get the help that he needs. And unfortunately, within about 24 hours, Randy was asking to leave. He had a job interview. He had all of these things that he wanted to do. And he said he was no longer suicidal, and the hospital released him. They told us that the gun had been confiscated by the Denver police. However, it was sitting in Randy's personal safe, unbeknownst to us. So we traveled through April. Randy's still convinced that he's going to become this famous rap artist. He reaches out to a psychologist, a therapist, and schedules time and appointments with her. And we were supporting that. We knew he needed a lot more. The psychologist connected him with a psychiatrist, and he had an appointment with the psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist diagnosed Randy with anxiety, depression, PTSD, bipolar, psychosis resolved, and ADHD, anything,
Mood disorder.
and a mood disorder. And then they prescribed him Adderall. So Randy started taking the Adderall around mid-June. His mood became more stable and better in June. However, he was still convinced he was going to become this famous rap artist. He was still recording music. We could see that Randy wasn't sleeping well, trying to find different jobs, although he was gainfully employed at 2 jobs at this point. So everything was not working well or working right for Randy, and he was still using marijuana heavily and letting us know of his use.
And then he kind of towards the end of June started using a little bit less marijuana in early July because he talked to us about it and just said with him taking the Adderall, he was for his ADHD, he didn't need as much marijuana. But fast forward, everything seemed like it was okay. We thought that things were progressing. We did an online session with him and a therapist, and we felt pretty good about that. And that was early July. And then on July 16th, Heather talked with him that evening. He called and he was kind of down. And they talked through a few things. And once they got off the phone, he seemed like he was doing a little bit better.
And we made a promise to talk the next day, and we said, I love you. Everything will be okay.
Mhm.
And then he sent us a couple texts throughout the night.
Basically just telling us that he was going to be quitting the music, he was going to be quitting weed for good, and he wanted to surround himself with happy and healthy people. And he just said, this has been too much for me and for you guys, and I want to, kind of own up and start living a good life. And he just said, love you. And then about 43 minutes later, so we were sleeping at this time, so this was the middle of the night, he sends a text and says, is he,
He said,
I'm
I love
sorry.
you, Mom, and I'm sorry. Please tell Dad the same. I wish I would have been a better person. And I woke up to that the next morning and I checked my phone and I read the first one and I thought, oh, that sounds, pretty hopeful. And then I read the second one and my heart dropped. And um, I didn't want to believe that that was a goodbye text. So I quickly texted back, today's a new day, always time for a fresh start. And then we waited to hear back from Randy.
But in all fairness, I mean, for all the chaos that we had in those months, we had so much up and down that his text was just one of a number of texts that we received over that period of time that would always make us question things. So I just said, no, he's probably okay. Everything, he's just probably having an episode, not realizing what he was actually in, which was cannabis-induced psychosis. But the next day, or 2 days later, after not hearing from him, because sometimes if he wanted to reach us, he'd call us, text us, call us, text us. In a matter of an hour, we might get 6 calls, right? And sometimes we'd go to reach him, and it could take a couple of days for him to get back to us because of his jobs. One of them was a night job, the other was a daytime leasing job. And after about 48 hours, we started getting really anxious. So we called the police and asked them to do a well check, which we had done a couple times prior to this. And unfortunately, our worst fears were confirmed at that well check. We received a call hours later from the coroner's office just telling us our son had died by suicide.
Yeah. And then, we were crushed. Our hearts were broken. Our girls' world turned upside down. And we just started asking why. And we were fortunate in that, we were given Randy's personal belongings. So we had his computer and his phone. And like my husband said, there were so many answers to our questions in that phone, and we were able to connect. We eventually connected with Laura Stack, who we learned about cannabis induced psychosis from, and then we did a deep dive into that, and we realized that that's what our son had been experiencing. And we also learned what today's highly potent product is, how detrimental it is to the developing brain, and how it changed it, and really it was his demise. And so sadly, this product that our son thought was beneficial and helping him really in the end was caused him to take his life. And so now our goal is to kind of share what we've learned so that other families don't have to go through this and hopefully spare others the pain that this has brought to us.
In between his notes, his journals, his artwork, and his video clips that he left, a lot of those really translate and work well with going out and speaking to youth because they're hearing it from somebody who's 21 years old, talking about how they had, when they were 15, started using marijuana because they had social anxiety and kind of wanted to be accepted. And then him talking about going through the psychotic break that he did, and then him talking about how cannabis might do wonders for some people, but right now he needs to focus on his own life and kind of stay away from it, basically. And in the video, then it shows him, after a couple, probably 10 days of saying that all of a sudden, or 3 days later, I'm sorry, forgive me, 3 days later, he's in the mental hospital because he's feeling suicidal. And all these things that he left us because he thought he was going to be this famous rap artist, we now are able to use as teaching tools for the youth and for their parents to be able to say, hey, this stuff is not what you think it is. And I get that a lot of parents out there are probably like we were 10 years ago, where you think, this stuff can't be that bad, right? But we learn that this stuff is way more powerful and way more dangerous than anyone wants to give it credit for. And it's really wreaking havoc on our communities, our youth, and our families. And so, as Heather said, we go around now and we speak. Yesterday, we were in front of probably 500 kids. And, it's an hour-long presentation, and the kids really are engaged. And afterwards, we do a series of questions and we give away candy bars. And it's amazing to think of all the stuff that they retain that we talk about, all the damages that marijuana, THC, and cannabis can have on the brain and on their mental health. And these kids are listening. And that makes us feel good because it is a bittersweet time being that losing Randy, but then having the answers that most people never get, and then be able to share those answers with other people.
And, ironically, when we got Randy's toxicology report back, we saw that he had low levels of THC in his system. People will say that this drug is not addictive, but if you talk to people who have tried to stop using, the withdrawal from marijuana is real. It may not be physically have as many detrimental physical effects, but the withdrawal is very much a mental health issue. It causes anxiety, it causes depression, it causes people to feel suicidal. And sadly, that's what was going on with our son. He was trying to quit and he just became so low. And he was also, his mind wasn't working right. So we speculate, probably was hearing things and seeing things that didn't exist. And it was all as of a result of his use. So we share that message with the kids because it's a message we wish our son would have heard and would have gotten, because he was a cautious young man who wanted to be healthy. I mean, he worked out, he tried to take care of his body, but he was quickly addicted to marijuana and believed a false narrative from the industry.
So, a little bit more on that is, we started a nonprofit about a year and almost 2 years ago now, right? I'm trying to think here. Time is just flying by. We started a nonprofit called Be Extraordinary, Be You. And as we said, we kind of go out and try to teach and talk. But we do find it really important because a lot of our youth today are not comfortable in their own skin. And they look to substances to try to solve these problems. And really, they're just a band-aid on a long-term issue. So our goal with them is to really let them know, hey, if you have concerns or if you're struggling mentally, reach out to a professional. Don't look at drugs or sprinkling other things in like alcohol to try to solve those things, because it's only going to make it worse.
This is my book, A Higher Love, and it's a journey through addiction, cannabis-induced psychosis, suicide, and redemption. And really what it is an educational memoir. So I share Randy's story, but I also tried to put some science in there to help people understand. And the reason I did it was because when we were struggling, it was a very lonely place to be. You feel ashamed, you feel guilty, you feel all of these things that you wish you could change, and you feel really out of control. And so if the book will help people by giving them some resources and some science, um, that would be our goal, is just to share all that we've learned to prevent this from happening to any other family.
But we're very active in different things, and it's really, we're not really focused on the legislation at this point. We're really focused on the education because we do believe that's the way to be able to change this outcome, is give these kids the information. They can decipher it. So some of them are still going to use, but if we can get a certain amount of the kids to say, hey, I'm not going to do that, we do believe, and we know we're slowly making an impact. It's just hard sometimes to know what those impacts are.
And getting that information out to the parents as well, so
Yeah.
that they can have great conversations with their kids, keeping them informed so they can make good choices.